So you'll see that there's two files that you can open. One is called Cosine 1 and the other one is Cosine 2. So go ahead and open up Cosine 1. Now when you open that up, you should have this little circle here. Now we're going to look at the cosine function initially down this axis here as opposed to along this axis. So let's just draw it out first of all so you can see it. So now you can see what's happening is the little red dot is rotating round the circle again in the anti-clockwise direction, and as it rotates round the circle you can see that it's drawing out this function here, and this function is the cosine function. So let's zoom out so we can get it all in. So as I move along all the way along to 360 degrees, that'll draw out this little function here. So that is the cosine function. So let's zoom in and have a little look and we'll see how we're able to generate that function. So we'll put everything back to 0 again. Now the cosine function is the x distance here divided by the distance here, which is called the hypotenuse. So what we have here in this distance, this length here, is called the adjacent, because it's going to be adjacent to the actual angle that we're trying to find the cosine of. So if we were to look at this distance here, well, this distance here is the same as this distance here, okay, and the angle we're trying to find is this little angle here. So this length here is adjacent to that angle. So this is the adjacent and this is the hypotenuse. So the cosine is the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. So it's just this length divided by this length here. Now again, if we make this length here is just the radius of the circle, which is equal to 1, then it just means that we're going to have the value of cosine, value of your cosine is going to be your x divided by, now we can call that distance r if you want, so it's going to be x upon r, but if r is just equal to 1, we can just simply say it's going to be the value of x. But what we'll do is, rather than plot the x up this way, we'll plot it just as we see it. So if we see it as actually along this axis, we'll just plot it down along this axis. So let's continue around here. You can see that the x value is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and this height here is simply this little height here. And as it tends towards 90 degrees, you'll see that the x distance will tend towards a value of 0. So that's at 0 here, and we've got 0 at this point here. Now whenever we get into the second quadrant here, you'll see that the value of your x is increasing, but it's becoming a more negative value. So you can see we've got the negative value for x here. Now again, you can open this up and you can follow this curve all the way around. So you see at this point here it's going to be a length of -1, and as we continue along you can see that the length here x is getting smaller and smaller, and again it will tend towards a value of 0. And then in the final quadrant you can see that the value of x is going to start increasing again when it's a positive value, until eventually we get all the way around to 360 degrees. You can see that the length here, x, will again tend to the radius, which is a value of 1. So this is our cosine function. Now what we do is we don't actually draw it down in this axis. We take the whole function and we just put it on to the x-axis. So we take the whole thing and we start it up here and we just run it along the x-axis. Now I just showed you it this way first of all because this is the way you can see it naturally occurring. The x distance here, height here, is just this height here. So let's go ahead and we'll open up the cosine 2 file and we'll see it drawn along the x-axis. So this is the cosine 2 file. So if you go ahead and open it up now. Now I'll draw this out. You can see that as we move the value along here, you can see that the red dot is going to move along the circle in an anti-clockwise direction, and it's going to draw out the cosine function. So this is the same function we've seen just a second ago, but we've actually drawn it along the x-axis. So let's go ahead again and we'll just have a look and see how we generate that. So the cosine function is going to be given by this length here divided by that length there. Now this length here is the hypotenuse, and this particular value, this particular example, that's going to be a value of 1, so it's just the radius of that circle. So the cosine function then is just going to be this height here, so it's y upon 1, which is x upon 1, it's just a value of x. So let's move this along and you can see the function as it gets generated. So at this point down here, the value of the cosine function is actually a value of 1. So we start it now up at this point here, which is 1. And you can see as the distance decreases, the height of this distance here is going to be this length here. So as we increase it towards 90 degrees, you'll see that the length here is going to head towards 0, and it means that the height of this function will head towards 0. So there you can see it's actually at 0. And then as we get into the second quadrant, you can see the length here is increasing, but it's a negative value, and this is the negative height. So this length here is the same as that length there. And as we increase it, you can see that the x value will tend towards just the radius, which in this case will be a value of -1. So that's a distance -1, and the height here is -1. And as we move into the third quadrant, you'll see that the distance here again starts to decrease, and that's the distance there start to decrease. So this height here is the same as this length here, and you can see it's still a negative value. Now if we head in down to 270 degrees, you can see again that the x distance here will tend towards 0, and that's it tending towards 0 there, and it's like 0 at 270 degrees. Now if we head into the fourth quadrant, you can see that this length here again is going to start getting bigger, and it's bigger in a positive sense, till eventually work all the way around the circle to get 360 degrees, and at 360 degrees this length here will tend towards the radius, which is a value of 1, and you can see that the cosine function will then tend to a value of 1, and that's a value of 1, and that's us going round 360 degrees. So in the next video we'll go ahead and we'll look at the sine, the cosine and the tan function in one graph.